Thank you. I'm glad to be here today, and I want to thank all of you for coming. This has been a tremendous experience for me, and a wonderful experience working with the people that helped organize this and put it on. I've never worked with a better and more hardworking and straightforward group ever in my life, so it's been a real pleasure to do this. Today we're going to talk about, on this portion, is about mining, the economics of mining, some of the aspects of oil and gas, and also some of the environmental issues that we run into as miners. Myself, I'm a consulting geologist. I've been working in the mining industry for 40 years, unfortunately, a little more than 40 years, so I've had a little bit of experience with this, but not to this extent with working with a group of this quality and this caliber that we have on this panel today. Today I'm going to use as most of the specific examples for the economics basically going to come out of Nevada, and more specifically out of Elko and Eureka counties. The reason I picked Nevada, because Nevada has a lot of experience on working with mining issues and that sort of thing in terms of land use, and they also produce $6.9 billion a year in revenue from mining, which is the largest amount of any state in the union. I went and I looked at a flow sheet that the state of Nevada put together to show how a project starts out and how it goes through all the various stages toward the end and even all the way to closure of a mine. I found out that there are 39 departments, divisions, and agencies that a mining company is liable to have to work with during the life of that mine. That's 39. Most of these entities require multiple permits over the life of that mine. At least 11 of these are federal agencies which duplicate, in essence, the work of the state and have no bearing on interstate commerce or resources other than the management of the land. Another 5 agencies deal as state agencies implementing federally mandated environmental requirements. As a consequence of this, a consequence of the country's inefficient permitting system, it takes an average of 7 to 10 years to secure the permits needed to commence operations in the U.S. 2 years in Canada and Australia, larger producing mining companies than the United States with similar environmental laws. One of the things that the National Mining Association has put out in a study they did in 2012 is that during this permit process, the value of that particular mine can be depleted by at least half of its value. I have a bunch of sort of names and reasons I want to demonstrate that this is true, and one of them I call a bean counter paralysis. Me being a geologist and trying to run things on a technical and scientific basis, we always run into the bean counters. Those are the guys that handle the money. Most mining companies and most businesses look 5 years out as their return on investment sort of time frame. It used to be in the early 70s when I started, they looked 20 years ahead in the mining industry, but most of them look 5 years. They want a return on investment within 5 years. Well, when you're looking at 7 to 10 years just to get the permit, a bean counter is not very comfortable with that. So another issue that why these mines lose money during the permitting process is that when the decision is made to go forward, no one knows what the price of metal is going to be 7 to 10 years down the road. They base it on what they think, what it is today. So that's harmful and a disincentive to people to come in and produce. Another one is fuel prices. Mining takes a lot of fuel. Big equipment takes a lot of fuel and a lot of cost. We don't know what fuel prices are going to be 7 years from now. We don't know what they're going to be 2 years from now, or maybe 2 months from now. One of the biggest ones is the uncertainty of the permit process. You could spend millions of dollars and years and end up with a dry bag. Nothing in the bag except experience of the permitting process. That scares investors to death. So, with that being said, it's clear that consolidating the jurisdiction for mine permitting within the state and the counties would be a more efficient way to look at this. It would make a huge impact on the ability of companies and investors to spend that money in the mining industry in any given state. I'm going to talk about a few stats from a report that was done for Elko County in 2010. And I believe that these stats would hold true for the rest of the states in the western United States. This is a report from the impact of federal land policies of the economy of Elko County, Nevada by George Leeming, 2010. In 2006 to 2008, the mineral industry of Elko and Eureka counties produced an average of $2.4 billion annually in output from a combined 83,000 acres. That represents a yield of $28,000 per acre of land devoted to mineral production. Think about that, $28,000 per acre of land used for mineral production. That's a very significant number. I don't care where you come from. In most of Nevada, mineral production is controlled by federal regulations. In Elko County, Nevada, it's 75% controlled by federal regulations. Not only that, but the private ground that is used is so intimately tied with federal ground that the same rules essentially affect that private ground as are implemented are the controlling forces on the federal ground. So that's a very significant number of acres controlled by the federal government, and that therefore controlling the revenue that's generated off of them. In all of the, just for example, if you take all the acres in Elko and Eureka County and divide the money that's generated off them, the business sales off of per acre for both of those counties combined is $774 per acre for business sales, $167 per acre personal income, and a government revenue of $2.36. In about 2010, there began a real push for doing royalties on, excuse me for a second, my hay fever is something else this spring. The federal government started talking about royalties. The pseudo-environmentalists, started pushing real hard for royalties to be put on production off of federally controlled lands. What would happen is they produced a chart, and they proposed 8% on gross revenue on each mine or each mineral mining operation that was producing. 8%, think about that for a minute. 8%, if you had a business and somebody came to you and said, okay, you're selling a candy bar for $10, okay, and you get $10 out of that, we're going to take 80 cents of that. And and this is not your net, this is your gross. So that's a huge amount, 8% of anybody's profit, and that's coming straight from your revenue side, is a big hit. In Elko County, an 8% gross revenue would deplete the mining industry revenues by $45.6 million per year. It would deplete personal income by $27.4 million per year, and it would decrease the local government revenues by $948,000 per year. Think about that. That's money that would be in the private sector's hands and the local government's hands that is going to be gone on an 8%. Those numbers drop to 11.6 for mining industry, 11.6 million on the mining industry revenues, 7 million on personal income revenues, and $247,000 for local government revenues based on a 2% gross revenue. If you think about that, when in 1993, to demonstrate how this affects, in 1993 they passed a law that said every mine had to pay $100 fee to the federal government. Okay, when they implemented that, the impact on Elko County alone was a loss of $12 million in private sector revenue, just from that was per year, just from that one fee of $100 per claim per year. So you can see the question I guess you would ask is, why should any state want to take resource money away from its people and give it to the federal government to waste away as they see fit outside the state which generated that money? Let me talk about people who opposed the federal government's planning. This is from a letter from the Governor Sandoval of Nevada, dated January 15th, 2016. This is to the head of the BLM. This is a portion of that letter. This letter formally transmits the state of Nevada's scoping comments for the proposed mineral withdrawal environmental impact statement, EIS, published in the Federal Register on September 24th, 2015. This is the governor saying this. Let me start by saying, excluding any lands from mining and exploration or from other authorized multiple uses is inconsistent with the Nevada Greater Sage Grouse Conservation Plan and the Conservation Credit System, which I believe is the best conservation plan for Nevada. Nevada's plan and the CCS create meaningful disincentives for mining and exploration in priority sage-grouse management areas through compensatory mitigation requirements that achieve and qualify a net conservation gain for the greater sage-grouse. The CCS is also consistent with President Obama's recent mitigation plan. I propose that the land withdrawal will not be able to show any measurable results except for the demise of the mineral exploration industry in Nevada. The urgency to implement the withdrawal proposal prior to conducting the proper analysis needed to evaluate the efficiency of the action and the socioeconomic impact of the action is unclear. He goes on in his paper to detail the objections that the state and his office have. It is clear that the state has a plan, a vested interest, and a way to accommodate multiple use in the economy of its rural citizens. I believe all states would say the same if the federal government was out of the way. Okay, let's talk on a national basis. In 2012, Australia and Canada were ranked the best places to invest in the mining industry. Both countries have environmental laws for mining that are similar to the United States. Regulations have permitting timelines of approximately 2 years compared to 7 to 10 years in the United States. The share of global metals mining revenue in 1993 was 21% for the United States. It's gone in 2012 down to 8%. Another study shows that from number one global mineral production in 1990, the U.S. went from number one in 1990 to number 7 in 2015. As an exploration professional, I can tell you this is not because we don't have the resources and we don't have the metals in the field. You know, that's not the reason why that we've dropped in production. Some of the best and biggest deposits ever found have been found in the last 20 years. So, with that in mind, the U.S. now produces $78.3 billion a year from the mineral sector, from the non-fuel mineral sector. That has, if you project that back to where we were in '93, that would be $206 billion a year today. That's a $128 billion gain that we would have if we were operating at the scale we did in '93. Think what our roads and whatnot could do and what they would look like, what our schools would be like if we had that $128 billion back in our private sector's pocket, using it efficiently within the communities. About 56% of what we can, that we continue, or 56% of our mineral revenue comes from states west of the Mississippi River. Only 41% of our population is west of the Mississippi River. This clearly shows that if this trend continues as it is planned by the quasi and pseudo-environmentalists, the rural America on the west side of the Mississippi will take another huge economic hit beyond what it's already taken from the lack of grazing, the lack of timber production. It's targeting the West more than it's targeting any place else in the country. What to do? What to do? There are some things that the National Mining Association has put forward and things that I have put forward that I think that we have to do. with a clearly outlined and defined and enforced timelines for government approval processes. We have to specify lead agency and coordinate lead agency roles, eliminating duplicity by making one lead agency cover all concerns. The National Mining Association says, for a better, more sustainable and resilient U.S. economy, we need public policies that provide a more predictable and efficient permitting process to feed the U.S. manufacturing supply chain and support our economy. I say the best regulator is the one closest to the project. Put the jurisdiction of current federal lands back in the joint hands of the state and their counties and watch our economy grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim Smith. All right, now joining us from Alton Coal, Elizabeth Brereton. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's all yours.
I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak today. I'm an attorney, and brace yourselves, even worse, I'm an environmental attorney. But I represent Alton Coal, and we've been discussing a lot of the interplay between state and federal regulations today. Alton Coal's Coal Hollow mine, I think, is a really good local example in Utah of the interplay of state and federal regulation and kind of this tug of war between conservation and natural resource development. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the greater sage grouse. By show of hands, have any of you seen this magnificent bird? Okay, everyone is. So Alton Coal, the Coal Hollow mine is actually kind of in the middle of a sage grouse habitat, or an area that's been designated by the BLM as sage grouse habitat. Now, to be clear, the Coal Hollow mine is actually on private property, 350 acres of private property, and we are mining private mineral rights. Nevertheless, we have been incentivized to work with state and federal officials to develop sage grouse conservation measures to protect a very small group at Coal Hollow. Kind of background on the sage grouse, this all started back in 2003 when an environmental group filed suit with the Fish and Wildlife Service to get the sage grouse listed under the ESA. After a series of back and forth in the courts, in 2010, the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that although the sage grouse was eligible for listing, it wasn't warranted. And this was kind of a call to arms for states. States in cooperation with the BLM, starting actually back in 2006, but really taking off in 2009, 2010, developed pretty aggressive conservation plans. Alton Coal was very involved in developing Utah's conservation plan for a number of reasons. A lot of the data that the state had was pretty scant, actually, but Alton Coal, in the process of developing our mine, we had the best data on sage grouse populations and the most recent data on sage grouse populations. So we were able to work with state officials to develop broad conservation strategies that would be effective in Utah. In September 2015, as we heard, the Fish and Wildlife Service, looking at these state conservation plans, determined that listing under the ESA wasn't appropriate. But as kind of I guess, a sidekick, then the BLM came in with their land use plan amendments and ended up mandating what looks like could be pretty restrictive development restrictions, which would, and some people argue, would actually be more restrictive than had the bird just been listed under the ESA. So Utah's sage grouse management plan, which was developed based on local data with input of local groups, kind of has a three-pronged approach to avoid and minimize, mitigate. And to be clear, resource development and conservation work hand in hand. No area is totally off limits. Where there are sage grouse, the plan calls for implementing certain measures that minimize the impact to the bird. The land
Liz,
use-
can I interrupt you a second? With
Yeah.
the sound of freedom above, would you make sure you get right on top of that microphone,
Oh,
please?
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The BLM's land use plan amendment, initially when BLM was proposing through the EIS process, through the NEPA process, BLM claimed that they would be referencing state data, local data, and that there would be a great deal of overlap between state plans and BLM plans. What's happened in reality, though, is that the BLM plans have taken very old state data, and they haven't coordinated with the state managers. So from the perspective of a business, we're now faced with two separate plans. Mind you, we're on private land, and trying to figure out the best way to go forward, not only to keep current mining operations going, but also to expand mining operations in Utah, where we have a federal lease currently under review for 3,000 acres. You'll like this. Our environmental impact statement has been under review by the BLM for 10 years. We don't even have a permit. This is just for the lease. 10 years they've been reviewing it. So I'm just going to run through quickly what we're doing. When Alton Coal came to the Coal Hollow area, it was not ideal sage-grouse habitat. Apparently sage-grouse, it was filled with pinyon and juniper vegetation. Predators like to hide in it and then pounce on the bird. So the sage-grouse was under attack from natural predators. But Coal Hollow, in cooperation with state partners and the BLM, developed a program whereby we would have a disturbance area of 224 acres, but we would actually create and improve over 2,000 acres of habitat. And this habitat, I don't know how many of you have been down there, but it is a virtual nirvana for sage grouse. We've restored, you can see kind of in the background, actually, in this slide. In the very background, you see what the area looked like before mining operations began. And you see these pinyon and juniper and oak. And in the kind of the middle ground, you see the mining operation. And then closer where you see the sage grouse, these are our lop and scatter projects where we create prime areas for the sage grouse to strut and attract mates. And then you see the area where we've actually restored sage grouse habitat through the sagebrush and grasses. And we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into mitigating thousands of acres of sagebrush. Now, the BLM has told us that sage grouse do not thrive in mines or anywhere near mining. But our data indicates that the sage grouse has actually done pretty well, all things considered. We're seeing a population boom at the mine at the moment. The idea is that, without our habitat restoration, a lot of this area would still be pretty filled with invasive species and predators. But as you can see, we went from no sightings in 2007, and then once mining began, with the exception of 2011, we've had a steady uptick. And 2016 is looking like we're going to see even more sage grouse. What you see in this chart is the count of males. You can take, so there were just under 15 males flushed, and you multiply that by 7. We multiply that by 7 to get the estimated population at the mine site. Again, our conservation measures are data-driven in partnership with local groups. We do observe development restrictions. 2 hours before sunset, 2 hours before sunrise, no mining takes place at the mine. That's to encourage the sage grouse to get out and strut his stuff and attract females. And we also Every employee at the mine has been trained to spot and report sage grouse that they've seen and observed, so we can track that population. Oh, sorry. And the sage grouse are doing quite well. I'm just going to speed through these. Now, we, as I mentioned earlier, we have an application into the BLM to expand the mine by over 3,000 acres. This has been a 12-year process. Our EIS, we still don't have a final EIS, has been under review for 10 years. Now, with the land use plan amendment passed by the BLM in 2015, in combination with the Secretary's coal moratorium, the expansion has been, is now facing some pretty big obstacles. The mine has been identified in priority habitat for the sage grouse. So in order to develop, to actually get our lease now, we're going to have to demonstrate that that we are in a non-habitat area. The priority habitat designation was not based on any of our data or the state's data. Governor Herbert has repeatedly written to BLM to protest the fact that BLM has miscited state data and state studies, and BLM's designation as priority habitat for the sage grouse is arbitrary, capricious. The BLM land use development restrictions, I'm not going to get into those. Let's just say that they're a lot stricter than the state. I can talk to you after about those. I know we're running short on time. But the state has been great to work with. The state, even the state BLM office, recognizes the importance of mining and the importance of Alton Coal and Coal Hollow in the local community. And notwithstanding these kind of broad restrictions coming down out of Washington, D.C., the local BLM office and the state have indicated that they would like to work with Alton Coal to try to get this lease by application through and expand the mine by another 3,000 acres. So we're currently in the process of negotiating that and trying to figure out what we can do to maximize resource development while still protecting the sage grouse. And as you know, the land use plan amendment and the sage grouse has triggered an avalanche of litigation. Idaho, Utah, Nevada, North Dakota recently, Wyoming have all filed suit. Every governor of those states has already filed protests with the BLM regarding the process the BLM went through, or the lack of process the BLM went through to designate priority habitat. And I think I'll wrap it up there, but if you have any questions about the land use management plan, ESA, NEPA, please talk to me. And I guess we'll turn it over to the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. And we'll have a question-answer session here when we complete. Matt Anderson back. If you're just joined us, Matt's with the Coalition for Self-Government in the West, a project of the Sutherland Institute. Matt, it's all yours.
So I'm like a bad in-line, never go away. You guys get me again. Let's find here.
I think those healthcare officials next door were applauding your sage grouse plan, Liz.
All right, so I'm going to talk specifically about oil, gas, and then just briefly touch on coal. So the Rocky Mountain states, they are a significant player in the amount of energy resources that are available. The stats I have here from a study done by Dr. Considine say that the Rocky Mountain states produce more than 1.2 million barrels of crude oil and natural gas liquids per day, more than 20% of the U.S. natural gas production, and then more than half of our nation's coal output. Collectively, all this output of oil, gas, and coal and associated liquids is equivalent to 5.6 million barrels of oil per day, which would make the Rocky Mountain region place 9th in the overall world, just behind Australia. So clearly we in the Rocky Mountain states have a large role to play here, not just in a national economy, but in a global economy when it comes to the natural resources that are available. The production of oil and gas on private property in the region has outpaced production from federal lands, the production on private property. While crude oil output on federal lands in the region increased almost 14% since 2009, production on private lands has increased at a rate of 28%, which is double that of the other one. So clearly, our private lands are doing much better when it comes to energy production than our federal lands. Kind of give you an idea of this, on the left side of the PowerPoint here, I have the Mountain West oil and natural gas production. This is a report put out by the Deseret Morning News. On federal lands, crude oil production was essentially flat, and natural gas production was down 35% for those years. Whereas on private and state lands, crude and oil production was up 88%, and natural gas production was up 43%. So clearly there's a big difference here in what's going on. The big reason for this is that the Bureau of Land Management takes a long time to approve permits. In 2011, the Bureau of Land Management itself reported that on average it took 307 days to approve new oil and gas lease well permits. That's almost an entire year. When you consider that states approve that at a time roughly a third of what that takes, really puts things on backlog and really holds up the process, especially when oil and gas prices are high. You need to be approving those so that we can get those out on the market and get the most bang for our buck. So I want to refer back to the study that I was talking about, Dr. Considine of Wyoming. He examined the potential that we have here in the Intermountain West and the resources that we have to be able to compete on a global market. And in this study, he made 3 separate projections, a low, a medium, and a high, based off of historical drilling practices, as well as how long it takes the BLM and to approve permits. And here's what he found underneath the medium scenario. Underneath that, if drilling practices were to go back to what they were prior to 2008, in 2008 we saw a big shift in how our oil and gas leases were approved, and as well as many other policies. If we were to go back before 2008, we would see underneath this medium scenario 600 more oil and gas wells drilled throughout the Intermountain West, $12.2 billion increased revenue per year, 87,000 jobs, and $3 billion in tax and royalty payments to state and local governments. And again, those royalty payments, what do they pay for? Our children's education, roads, fire departments, and on and on and on and on. So clearly there is a huge impact. If we could just go back to practices before 2008, we have a lot to offer. And that's not even the high scenario. That's just a fairly modest scenario offer. So let's talk about the state of Utah specifically underneath that. If under the medium scenario, we went back to 2008 practices here in the state of Utah, the state would expect to see 373 new oil and gas wells drilled over the next 10 years. This would contribute to $1.7 billion in added value of gross state product per year, and a corresponding activity in more than 14,000 annual jobs. We have a lot to offer. The production here in the West is really untapped. I heard a very interesting statistic a while ago. In 2014, the state of Pennsylvania experienced a 2,000% increase in the amount of natural gas they're putting out. The state of Utah experienced a 1% increase. What's the difference? The state of Utah is owned and controlled, more than 67% of it by the state or by the federal government, whereas the state of Pennsylvania, only 2% of it is controlled by the federal government. So clearly there's a big difference here, and these federal regulations are languishing our rural communities and taking away jobs and really hurting people. So with that, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Up next, Demar Dahl. Demar, I didn't ask you.
Is it okay, Trent, if I just sit right here?
You're going to be viewed as being lazy. It's up to you, Demar.
I couldn't hear you.
I didn't ask you which hat you're wearing today, so you have to tell me.
I changed pickups from what I was coming in, and I left my hearing aids in the other one. And it's hard to hear up here anyway, so I didn't hear what you said, so I assume that it's okay. Let me first say that I think it was worth the trip to hear Ronald Reagan. You know, I I worked really hard for Barry Goldwater, and then we thought that this country wasn't going to last very long. Things were going downhill really fast. We used to talk about, well, where can we go? Can we go to Australia and try running cows over there? And then I had a friend who had a business venture down on an island off of Mexico. And we were serious about trying to find someplace else to go because we didn't think it was going to last. And just think about the things that Reagan was talking about today and where we were then compared to where we are now. And it's good for us to get together and to talk about where we are and what our problems are. In Las Vegas last week, we had a pretty good gathering and talked about our problems. But at some point, we need to get serious about talking about our solutions. And tomorrow I want to talk to you about what I think is our only solution if we're going to continue, us who are involved in any commercial endeavor on the public lands. But Tim covered a lot of what I was going to talk about on the, and he did a good job of covering that. I sat down with Randy Brown, our natural resource guy in Elko County, and I said, because we protest everything. We don't let anything go past in Elko County. And he started getting out all of the statistics for what he thought. He said, here, you can talk about this, you can talk about this, and so on. Pretty soon we had a pile this high of stuff. But let me just tell you a little bit about Elko County that makes me kind of proud to be from there. It's where the original Sagebrush Rebellion started. It was because of a letter that the state BLM director sent out called the Deer Range User Letter. It became famous. He said, we're going to institute suitability criteria, and on your range, anything that's more than 4 miles from water, anything that has more than a certain slope or a erosion factor, you're not going to be able to use. If we got that letter today, we'd say, yeah, so what, you know. But that letter got more than 800 people at the Stockman's Hotel, and I'll talk to you more about this tomorrow, but at the Stockman's Hotel in Elko, and as a result of that, by the next fall, we had the Sagebrush Rebellion going. So then in 99, the Forest Service closed a road up in Jarbidge and rolled some big boulders out into it and said, okay, nobody's going to use this anymore. And one of our old timers, who's still with us, fortunately, was in the legislature then, made the statement that we're going to open that road. So we decided, yeah, we're going to open the road at Jarbidge, whether the Forest Service wants it opened or not. And we had a big rally in January sometime. We had good weather in Elko County just for that rally. We had to order the weather that way. We were all given speeches. I was giving a speech out in front of the courthouse, and afterwards a reporter said, well, when are you going to open the road? And I said, well, 4th of July. So that was how the date was set. We had over 2,000 people come to Jarbidge from all over the country to help open that road. I had a horse fall with me 2 weeks before. Grant Gerber, bless his heart, had the idea we're going to start the Jarbidge Shovel Brigade. It's still in existence. In fact, I'm still the president of the 501c3, which is the Jarbidge Shovel Brigade. And anyway, we had I forget how many buses coming from Idaho to haul all these people from our staging area over to where we were opening the road, because it was in a little narrow canyon where we were open. We had air ambulances coming in. Anyway, it was a big project, and 2 weeks before we were going to do it, I had a horse fall and collapsed the lung, broke my arm, and so they had me in the hospital, and they set me up an office in the hospital so we could keep the thing going, so we could open the road. We opened it. And if we hadn't of, there'd have been a lot more roads closed a lot sooner. But then the next thing that happened to us in 2009, the Forest Service came to our county commission and said, we're going to do a travel management plan, and we don't plan on closing any roads. We want you to sign up as a cooperating agency. And we said, yeah, great, we'll do that, and we'll be a coordinating agency also. And anyway, we went into great detail to work through that process, and I'll tell you more about how that all turned out. I'll tell you more tomorrow, but as a result of it, we ended up getting a congressional hearing in Elko on the travel management plan. And now we were the first to get involved in the lawsuit to try to hold back the sage hen. The old timers around our country still call them sage hen. But when the land use plan amendment came about, after they said we're not going to list the bird, and we found out what was in the land use plan amendment, then we had to push back, and we had 2 mining companies in 2 counties, and NACO, our Nevada Association of Counties, that started pushing back with our lawsuit. We're still in court on that. Elko County is the 4th largest county in the United States, in the continental United States, and it has 20% of all of the sagebrush focal area, the SFA, that is in western United States, which is about over 10 million acres. We have over 2 million acres just in Elko County. So 20% of our county is shut down to oil, gas, geothermal, wind generation. Any new prospect sites as a prospector, if you don't have a claim that you can show has value, then you lose it. And a claim is there because that's where you're going to work to find out if there is anything under that ground. How are you going to look under the ground and find out that something's there before you get a chance to work the claim? And they in that SFA, they are whacking grazing. Our 3 primary industries in Elko County: mining, ranching, recreation. A lot of the roads are going to be closed. In court, I was asked by one of the government attorneys. We went to federal district court on this. Now we're there waiting for the next step, 9th Circuit. I was asked when I was making references to the damage that's going to be caused by this land use plan amendment, if I could cite damages specifically that were happening to the livestock industry at that time. Well, it had only been in, this was, I think, in January. This had only been in effect since September. And what we were able to determine was not what had already happened, but what was going to happen. And so when the government attorney was following up on testimony with our then state BLM director. The government attorney said, well, now some of these people are saying that there isn't going to be access, there's not going to be roads in these SFAs wherever there are sage-grouse leks or within a certain distance, and which turns out to be most of those areas. And she said, is that really true? Because they can visit there, can't they? Aren't they free to walk? Or they could even ride a burro. And I wish I'd have brought that with me today. It's part of the transcript out of that trial, out of that hearing. It's what they actually said. So anyway, it's an ongoing battle. You heard about what Tim was telling you, the problems that miners have. They have to get financing. Everything is so unsure. Anyway, it's been great talking to you.
Ronald DeMar Dahl, folks. All right, we're going to take another break, but we got time. I want to have some discussion while we have folks here. So throw your hands up. I'll come to you. All right. Got it right off the bat. Excellent. Thank you, Kelly.
Hi, my name's Melody Molt. I live in Harney County, Oregon. I'm a survivor of the FBI takeover of our town in Burns. I own some property that has a mineral right reserved by the state of Oregon. We just farm the property. There's a procedure in place to extinguish dormant mineral rights for an individual. However, there's no procedure in place to extinguish, in my case, a 60-year-old dormant mineral right on my property if it's owned by the United States, state of Oregon, or any of its political subdivisions. Is there any process in place that we should be searching an avenue to reclaim our mineral rights on our own property?
DeMar, yeah, use the mic.
You know, I can address that because I have mineral rights in Elko County, and we just recently, within the last few years, had a lot of activity with oil. And oil companies came in, drilled, fracked, and found it. We're excited about it. And then this came along, this SFA stuff. Besides the 20% of our county that is shut down because it's in an SFA, over 70% of the entire county is in prime sage hen habitat. And the oil companies left because the price of oil went so bad. It just wasn't economical for them to do it. But they're going to come back. And when they come back, they can go into the holes that they were in before, but they can't get new ones. So there's somebody's property right that is a lot of property rights for mineral, oil, gas, whatever.
Tim or Liz?
It's lost.
Tim or Liz, did you want to comment on that?
Well, just so I understand, so it sounds like, so you own the surface and the state has mineral rights that or minerals haven't been developed in the subsurface, is that right? And a state law has addressing privately held dormant mineral rights. Those would be extinguished after 60 years, and you're saying you would like the states, after 30 years. Oh, it's been 60. You know, that would be a state-specific issue, and I'm not. Was it a legislative? It would depend on if it was a legislative mandate or an administrative action, which way you could go about challenging that legally. Unfortunately, as far as here in Utah or in and many other states. I'm not quite as familiar with Oregon, but mineral rights held by the state, they're held in perpetuity. So, it would be an uphill battle, unfortunately, and pretty costly. I hate to say it legally, but again, it would depend on if it's legislative or administrative, and you could work out or investigate if there's a plan of attack there, depending on the route.
Next question. Yeah, I'll hold the mic. You guys are hard.
John DeWarty, Modesto, California. Elizabeth, protecting a couple dozen sage grouse from pet predators. I'm using my imagination. What does predator control on the open range look like to protect a cluster of a couple dozen sage grouses?
Good question. Predators include coyotes, which are trapped or hunted. Ravens are also predators, and we have gone about, I don't know if you could say hiding. We want them to see these poison eggs anyway, but they're eliminated through poison and hunting as well. But it's been quite effective to eliminate predators through trapping, hunting, and poison on site. But I think the most effective thing is eliminating the perching places for especially ravens or hiding places by eliminating the pinyon and juniper vegetation growth.
Next.
Hi, I'm Gail Dixon from Harney County also. Reading all this stuff on the internet, a lot of it comes up with uranium mining and uranium-1. In Oregon, is there the uranium that we should be considering that the government's...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What is this uranium-1?
I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, there are some areas in Oregon, in the Lakeview country. They had there's some uranium potential down there, but the stuff that came out this last winter about in Oregon anyway, those were bogus claims about the government being after the uranium down there and the Steens in that country. I prospected that country years and years ago, and I've done a lot of work since then with well locations and that sort of stuff. And that uranium stuff down there, I can't speak for Nevada. Nevada's much more mineral rich than that portion of Oregon is. So, but in Oregon, in that part of the world, that's bogus.
Did you just say everything you read on the internet's not true? Tim, come on.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Casey from Harney County, and I have a question for you. I'm all for localizing management of our lands. My question is, will a community state have the resources to fight lawsuits piled on them by these environmental agencies? Sierra Club alone is a $9 million organization, and their MO is to bury the entity with lawsuits. So where we're talking counties, are they going to have the resources to fight these environmental lawsuits?
Well, let me speak to that. And one of the things that I think people don't get is that a part of the cost of these lawsuits that come forward through the pseudo-environmental groups is because of jurisdiction. If you change the jurisdiction from a local court or a state court, but stepping down from a federal court, all of a sudden your process moves 3 times as fast. It's three times less costly, and it's a jurisdictional issue. And when you start looking at the numbers that local governments, state, and I'm talking about state and county, generate from the increased resource production will easily compensate for those costs that are going to come up. But what has to happen is also, besides just the change in jurisdiction and the transition from federal to state or county, what also has to happen is we have to have a modification of NEPA, we have to have a modification of the Endangered Species Act, and we have to have a modification of the Equal Access to Justice Act so that we have an opportunity to fight these quasi-environmental groups on with their own dollars rather than them fighting us with our dollars. So the money will be there. The numbers are there. We can increase the revenues that come off these lands, and some of that revenue can be set aside for these jurisdictional battles that are going to have in our local jurisdictions, state and county.
I'd like to speak to that as well, just echoing a little bit about what he said. Of course, as I mentioned in the economic analysis study that I talked about, the enormous potential for revenue, but it's more importantly the process changes. You don't have that NEPA process that you need to worry about as much. You don't have those ways for them to come in and do the public comment nearly as much as you did on the federal level, and so you're going to be able to hedge it off a little bit that way. So I just wanted to echo that, yeah, absolutely, the money will be there, as well as the processes will be easier too.
So in my misguided adolescence, I worked on the other side, representing pseudo-environmental groups. And I have to say, it's a very effective litigation tactic. Whether or not Sierra Club feels like there's an ultimate victory, just tying a project up in litigation in federal court is pretty costly for the counties, for individual projects. The jurisdictional issue, I think, is a really important one. State courts move more quickly. That being said, if you're dealing with a NEPA or ESA issue or land use management plan issue, you're not going to get it kicked back to state court. It's going to stay in federal court. But I think that, as we've seen in Nevada, where we've had a coalition of counties and the state and private entities that have banded together to challenge the land use management plan amendment regarding the sage grouse, that's a very effective strategy to marshal resources and to make good, effective use of your illegal dollars spent. So I think that coalition building, the other side does it, Sierra Club does it, Western Watersheds, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. So I think, on the other side, if we can also build those same coalitions with our state partners and our other private entity partners, that would be an effective strategy. And we are already doing that.
I think they also have a PR issue, because if the Sierra Club comes in and does something locally, they're viewed as a bully, where if they do something against the federal government, they're like a hero. And I think that's a deterrent for them to do that locally. All right, one more.
All right, thank you. Callie Hendrickson from Colorado. And I have a couple of questions, Liz, if that's okay. Early, you had mentioned that the company had been incentivized to work with the BLM, I think it was, and so forth. And could you expand on that? The reason I'm asking that question is Craig, Colorado, and the coal mine up there, I think, just agreed to give 2,500 acres in order to get a permit to continue with their coal mining. That doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, so incentivized is probably the wrong word. Our permit was leveraged. It sounds like a very similar situation. Even though we're on private land, the state has a delegated power from the federal government to oversee mining operations. So in this way, the federal government's able to insert itself by demanding certain concessions regarding mitigation or land swaps. Basically, so they hold those over you, and you don't get your state mine permit. And is that what's happened?
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
So that's what we're finding. Yeah, and I mean, if it's on federal land where you have to have your state mine permit and a federal lease, it's even worse.
Thank you. And the second one was in the mitigation that you're doing for the sage grouse and so forth, and trying to do the predator control. One of the big challenges that we have is the raven is protected through the Migratory Bird Act. Mm-hmm. So what kind of process did you have to go through in order to be able to actually deal with the ravens and try to take care of them?
We work very closely with the local BLM office and the state. These ravens, and there aren't many. The bigger issue is the coyote, but everything we do, including when we implement predator control measures and the scope of those measures, they are all coordinated with BLM. BLM is on site. and they conduct monthly site inspections. The state is conducting weekly site inspections on our mitigation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you to everyone.